How's it going, everybody? My name is Graham, and for the past 3 months, I have been racing in an incredible online league on NASCAR Racing 2003. This is the story of the inaugural Rush Racing League Truck Series season. The season got underway with a 50-lap race at the Milwaukee Mile. This race was also the one designated as the throwback race, as was the Cup race at Milwaukee the same week. Given that this was the inaugural truck race for the league, we expected a few more than just 4 trucks to show up, but I was thankful for the sparse attendance, given that this was my first foray into NR 2003 online racing. Practice and qualifying were dominated by 2 drivers. The first one is Sean Derriman. Sean is the owner and president of the Rush Racing League, and someone who we will see pop up quite often in these race recaps. The other driver is Ian Griffith, who at the time was the reigning champion of Rush's Cup Series that had just wrapped up its inaugural season. I found myself solidly in the 3rd spot in terms of practice speed, slightly behind our frontrunners, but a ways ahead of the driver bringing up the rear, Ahmed Muhammad. Very little is known about Ahmed. He rarely speaks in the race chat and almost never says anything in the league's Discord server, which is linked in the description, by the way. Despite this, and the fact that he is regularly found at the rear in most races, he maintains a status as one of the fan-favorite drivers in the league in both the Cup and Truck Series. The race itself was a rather uneventful start to life for the new series. The 2 frontrunners of Sean and Ian ran out in front for most of the race, leading 17 and 24 laps respectively. By staying out on a couple of yellows, I managed to lead 9 laps myself, but it was never long before one of the other 2 got around me and took the lead once again. The main excitement came on the final lap of the race, where a heated battle between our 2 leaders resulted in Sean wrecking, and I was able to pass him for a rather lucky 2nd place finish. Ian took home the victory. Sean and Ahmed rounded out the 4-truck field. The second race of the season was a 45-lap race at Chicagoland on Memorial Day weekend. It saw a much healthier field of 9 trucks. Making their Truck Series debut in this race are a few names that we will see throughout the rest of the season, like Wesley Abston, Lillian Turner, John Butler, and Chris Bowes. Unlike the last race, I found myself among the fastest drivers in practice, only beaten out by a mere 0.03 of a second by Wesley, and I found myself qualifying in 3rd behind Wesley and the pole sitter Sean. The early stages of the race were plagued by cautions, but eventually we got a long green flag run that actually resulted in green flag pit stops. During the pit cycle, I stat out an extra lap and managed to lead 2. Those would be the only 2 laps that Sean didn't lead all night, as he would dominate the race and come away with his first win of the season. Wesley Abston, Lillian Turner, Scott Boyden, and John Butler round out the top 5. I got into the wall on the penultimate lap, and even though I managed to save it from wrecking, I lost a few spots and came away with a 6th place finish. Race number 3 was a 50-lap race at Kentucky Speedway. A few new faces made their debut this week, but by far the most notable one is Chad, also known as ACH. Chad had made appearances in the Cup Series prior to this, and had even won a race earlier in the season. In his time in the Cup Series, he had quickly gathered a reputation as somewhat of a dirty driver, someone who wasn't afraid to bump doors with you to gain a position. It would not take long for those of us in the Truck Series to figure out why. The race began with a very hectic 4-wide spread as the leaders entered Turn 1, and that really set the stage for most of the race. I spun by myself before we had made it a full time around the track, and on the ensuing restart, Chad put his nose under Chris Bowes and sent him flying up the racetrack. Cautions would be a continual theme in this race, with our longest green flag run being only 6 laps. Among those cautions, we saw Chad spin himself on lap 20, and by the time the race was winding down, he had bumped into just about everyone on the track. When a late race caution came out on lap 44, I made a risky call to take just 2 tires to try to put myself in a position to finish well. We restarted with just 3 to go, and by the time the white flag came out, I found myself in the spot every person in that server wished they were in. 2nd place, right behind Chad. I could describe to you what happened on those last 4 corners, but I think I'll let my recording of the race tell the story.
Get him.
Someone is so different.
He put me in a row. He dumped me earlier. Oh, he turned him.
I knew it. He got him.
Bitch!
Oh, it's the rest of the line. Look, Graham, hold on.
I ain't gonna get him. I ain't gonna get him.
Checkered flag in the air. Who's gonna get it?
Graham got it.
So then, after an incredibly hectic race with 7 different leaders and 14 lead changes, I managed to put my truck into victory lane for the first time ever, and on top of that, I found myself at the top of the point standings heading into race number 4. The 4th race on the calendar was the first and only road course that the league would be racing this season, and it came at my favorite one of them all, the classic Riverside Raceway. I was fairly confident heading into the race, but my confidence quickly evaporated following qualifying when I saw this.
121.8. Amazing. And then I crashed. Whoa, someone got faster than me? Whoa! 21.1.
That's crazy.
This was the first time we had seen Dallas shake in a truck race, and he made a statement by coming out and grabbing the pole by a large margin. He also made a statement later in the race by wrecking Chad, at the request of Sean. Then Chad paid me back for the Kentucky race. Hopefully you're beginning to see a bit of a pattern here. Anyways, despite running really well and leaving behind just about everyone else, as well as making this sick save on turn 1 during the late race battle, I simply did not have the speed down the backstretch to hold off Dallas in the end, and he walked away from Riverside winning his first ever race. It's Bristol, baby. This race featured a slimmer field than past races, simply because several drivers chose to avoid the potential mess that racing on such a tight track can often bring. But seeing as how I was fighting for a championship, I had no choice but to weather the storm. The first 51 laps of the race were led by the same person, and for the second week in a row, it's a newcomer, Lexi Herman. Everything was going right for her in the early parts of the race, but while pacing under the yellow flag, despite having no damage whatsoever to her truck, her engine decided to explode while leading the race. This took a race that seemed like it was already decided and busted it wide open. Chris and myself both led a few laps in her absence, but it was John Butler who eventually grabbed the lead from me and never gave it up, leading the last 17 laps of the race on the way to his first victory of the season. As we reached the halfway point in the season, this marked the 5th different winner that we had had in 5 races up until this point, and it was anyone's guess as to who would emerge as the eventual champion. I was still leading the standings at this point after grabbing back-to-back second-place finishes and finishing 4 of the first 5 races in the top 2. The second half of the season began at Iowa, and once again we see the emergence of a few new faces. Pim makes his second start driving the number 69 truck under the name Muammar Gaddafi. Newcomers Carl Childress and Phil Parker also make their first appearance in the truck series. A notable exclusion from today's lineup is Chad, which becomes increasingly obvious when you realize that the race ran with only a single caution early in the race. Unfortunately, I got involved in a minor incident with Chris that wasn't quite enough to throw a caution, and I found myself out of contention while the remainder of the race was run under green. The long green flag run did lead to a very interesting finish, however, as the run was right on the edge of the fuel window. Lillian Turner led 48 of the 63 laps, but, like several of the drivers, had to pit for fuel to avoid running out in the final laps. Getting taken out early wound up being a blessing in disguise for me, as I was able to save fuel for the entire run and easily make it without pitting, coming home with a 3rd place finish, while Pim also managed to stay out and take home the win. The Kansas race was one that was highly anticipated. The Cup Series race at the same track earlier in the season provided one of the most exciting finishes of the year, with Wesley pulling out a surprise win after a last lap wreck took out some of the favorites, and a heated moment between Ian and Sean left Sean suspended for multiple weeks following. The Truck Series race at Kansas was much more subdued. The lead was passed between Lillian and Sean for the early stages of the race, before their close battle got a little too close on lap 16. Using lessons learned from Mike Skinner,
how would you like to see this happening in front of you?
I was able to make it through without a scratch, and after a good pit stop, I found myself in the lead. A lead that I would hold virtually unchallenged for the remaining laps. John Butler ran a good race holding on to second, and Lillian, Carl, and Chris rounded out the top 5. I was pumped to become the first repeat winner in the Truck Series this season, but as it turned out, the story of this season was about to get much more interesting. You see, for the past few weeks, people had been keeping a close eye on Dallas Shake. He had showed immense speed at Riverside, but had been in the back of the field for pretty much every race since. Some people claimed there was something fishy going on. He insisted that he was simply, and I quote, goated at road courses, and the accusation of cheating started to fly, without any proof. That was until I started to revisit the race at Riverside and carefully watched how Dallas was driving the backstretch. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with NASCAR racing, for the vast majority of NASCAR's history, all of the cars and trucks have had a very simple 4-speed manual gearbox. Why do I bring this up? Well, as I studied Dallas's driving, I noticed something that was out of the ordinary. The speed he was able to carry at the end of the backstretch made it seem like he had a whole other gear. And that's when I saw it. Dallas did, in fact, have another gear. It was the biggest controversy in the history of the league. Dallas was suspended from the league indefinitely, and his pole and win at Riverside was taken from him and given to the next driver, which just so happened to be me. In the span of just a few days, I had gone from a single-win driver that was leading the points purely on consistency to a 3-win driver who was now dominating the race for the championship, with only 3 races remaining. After a week filled with controversy, what better way to calm everyone down than a nice plate race at Talladega? Truthfully, the racing was rather tame. Sean and Lexi grabbed the front 2 spots, but the lead was shuffled around several times throughout the different runs, as we would expect from a plate race. I found myself leading in the final laps of the race, but with 2 to go, Lexi found her way around me on the bottom, and she ran away with it with Carl pushing her from behind, while much of the field wrecked on the final lap trying to fight for the remaining positions. While the Cup race at Talladega earlier in the week had been criticized for being boring, the truck race proved once again to be an action-packed race from flag to flag. Despite my worst finish of the season, I was still able to secure enough points to mathematically secure me the Truck Series Championship with 2 races to go. Through 8 races, I had 3 wins and had only finished outside the top 3 twice. The penultimate race of the season came at Rockingham, and once again we saw new faces entering the ring and making a splash. Robbie Gilvin in the 80 truck and Victor Delgado III in the 39 were among the fastest drivers in practice, alongside myself, and the 3 of us qualified within a tenth of each other. The gap in speed was obvious from the beginning, but several drivers, including myself, struggled with a loose race car. After sustaining engine damage early in the race, I knew that I didn't have the speed to win, so I just focused on keeping the truck out of trouble and tried to set myself up for a decent points day. I did manage to lead a few laps after staying out on a caution, but Robbie caught me after just a handful of laps, and after having the fastest car all day, Robbie managed to bring home the win in his first Truck Series race. Heading into the season finale at Homestead, the point standings were all pretty much wrapped up, but every driver still wanted to be the one to win the final race. I was feeling good about my chances, having won the Cup finale at Homestead earlier in the week. Sean, Robbie, and myself were 3 of the fastest cars in practice, but all of us were quite a ways behind Chris Bowes, who was not only fast, but several tenths faster than everybody else. That proved true in qualifying, as he ran 1.5 tenths faster than Sean, who sat on the front row for the league best 5th time. Unfortunately for Chris, while his setup was fast, it ultimately proved too tough to handle under race conditions, and he found himself spinning multiple times, eventually taking him out of contention. I too thought I was out of contention for a win, as internet issues during a long green flag run put me off the lead lap. A couple of cautions at the end of the race reset the field, and on the final restart, the race was down to 2 of the fastest trucks all season, Sean Derriman and myself. The racing was close and clean, but ultimately Sean held me off to win his 2nd Truck Series race of the year. Sean wasn't the only one who did some celebrating that night though, as I took home the inaugural Truck Series title by a landslide. It had been a hard-fought season, but our 8 finishes inside the top 4 were more than double anyone else, and more than enough to secure me my first ever NR 2003 Online League Championship. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a comment. If you're interested in more Rush Racing League content, I stream every race over on Twitch, link in the description. I also plan on making more regular uploads about the league to my YouTube channel next season. Speaking of next season, if you're interested in joining the league, our next season will start up at the end of August. We run Cup Series races on Wednesday night and Truck Series races on Fridays. We are always looking for more people to race, so that next season might even be better than this one. I'll leave a link to the Discord in the description, and I hope to see you guys on the track. Thanks for watching.